Friends of the Dar, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to tonight's lecture. Part of Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyyah's 28th cultural season. Tonight, we will go on a journey of 4 centuries in a lecture titled Turning Prayers into Books, Compilations of Suras and Du'as in the Central Islamic Lands between 1300 and 1750. And we are very lucky tonight to have with us Dr. Simon Rettig. Dr. Simon Rettig is Associate Creator of the Arts of Islamic World at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Arts in Washington, D.C. Since he joined the museum in 2012, Rettig curated several exhibitions including The Prince and the Shah, Royal Portraits from Qajar, Iran, and the Arts of the Quran, Treasures from the Museum of Turkish and Islamic Arts. His current projects are an exhibition on the Great Mongol Shahnameh opening in August 2024, and a monograph of the friars' celebrated manuscripts of Nizami's Khosrow Ushirin. Tonight's lecture will introduce the development and evolution of compendiums of prayers. Please turn your mobile phones off and let's welcome Dr. Simon Rettig.
Thank you, Ejazi, for this kind introduction. And I would like to thank Her Excellency Shera Hassa al-Sabah for a kind invitation. It's my first time in the great state of Kuwait, so I am thrilled to be here and to give this lecture tonight here. There is a slight change in the title. I won't go up to the mid-18th century, but I will stop in the 16th century, because otherwise I would talk until midnight. And although the topic is fascinating, I'm sure we want to leave early, and perhaps you have to invite me again. The famed Moroccan traveler Abu Abdallah ibn Muhammad ibn Battuta, who lived in the 14th century, narrates in his Rihlat about his visit to the city of Alanya in modern-day Turkey, which was then part of the Karamanid Sultanate. And I quote, "We stayed in the college in this city, the sheikh of which was Shihabuddin el-Hamawi. One of their customs is that a company of boys with beautiful voices recite every day after the afternoon prayer in the congregational mosque and also in the college the Surat al-Fath, Surat al-Mulk, and the Surah Amma." End quote. In another town in Anatolia, Eyyirdir, in the Isparta province, where he also sojourned, Ibn Battuta recounts about the local ruler, Abu Ishaq Bak. He is a man of upright conduct and makes a practice of attending the afternoon prayers in the congregational mosque every day. When the Asr prayers are concluded, he sits with his back to the wall of the Qibla. The Quran readers take their seats in front of him on a high wooden platform and recite the Surah of Victory, Sovereignty, and Amma with beautiful voices that work upon men's souls and at which hearts are humbled, skins creep, and eyes fill with tears. End quote. The practice of reciting specific Quranic surahs as prayers, understood as dua, invocation, and not salat, obligatory prayer, at certain times of the day has been an integral part of the Muslim devotional daily life since the early Islamic period. Accounts like Ibn Battuta's attest to the existence of organized rituals of surah recitations in public spaces, such as mosques, during the Mongol period. The practice was probably already implemented earlier. What is not mentioned in the text, however, is the material used during these rituals. often, if not always, a recitation of the Quran goes alongside with the visual presentation of the text itself, the Word of God as a book, the form under which it is materialized. Its physical presence visually supports the oral nature of the Quran. What form was then used? Was it a complete copy, a single volume of the Mus'haf, or specific volumes from a juz set, 30 sections, which comprised the chapters to be recited? So in the case of the episodes recounted by Ibn Battuta, it would be 3 different volumes of a set, juz 26 for Surat al-Fath, juz 29 for Surat al-Mulk, and juz 30 for Surah Amma, which is the other name for Surat al-Naba. Today, I would like to look at the origin and formative stages of collections of Quranic chapters after 1300, under the Mongols and their successors, a subject that has received little attention from scholars so far. By 1500, these volumes include not only selections of surahs, but are also copies of a single chapter of the Quran. Particularly prominent in this category is the 6th chapter, Surat al-An'am, with dozens of codices produced in the Ottoman sphere at a time when the Sultanate was expanding and turning into an empire, so from the reign of Bayezid II in the late 15th century to Suleiman I around 1550. The just quoted Ibn Battuta traveled across the region in the 1330s during the reign of the last Mongol Ilkhanid, Abu Sa'id, who died in 1335. The Ilkhanid rulers were new Muslims, as they adopted Islam only in the late 13th century when Khazan Khan converted. The capitals of the realm were Tabriz and Sultaniyeh in northwestern Iran in the summer and Baghdad in the winter. The latter remained an important center for the book production during that period, as testify single-volume masahif of modest size, penned by celebrated calligrapher Yaqut al-Mustasimi, and you have an example here. All the copies in the juz format, in the so-called Baghdadi size, the largest at the time, which is 72 centimeters by 50 centimeters, commissioned for Sultan Ujaytu, allegedly for his monumental tomb in Sultaniyeh. And you have one of the volumes here. And it's not even reflecting on the scale. I mean, that is monumental as books. This is also a time when we witness the creation of refined books of prayers, such as a copy of the prayers of the 7 days according to the family of the Prophet, which bears a forged colophon with the name of Yaqut, that you see. Oops, sorry. That you see here. As well as a possibly dubious later attribution to another famed calligrapher active during Abu Sa'id's reign, Mubarak Shah ibn Qutb, and the attribution is here. It's Mubarak Shah ibn Qutb. The large copy, with its finely seized paper, elaborate laid out, refined calligraphy and illuminations, may date from the late Ilkhanid period and may be an imperial work. Around the same time, in the 1320s, another set of the Quran was produced for Queen Baghdad Khatun, Abu Sa'id's first wife. She was the daughter of the powerful commander-in-chief in Anatolia, Amir Chupan Sulduz. Only the last juz is known. So the last juz goes from verse 1 of Surah 78, An-Naba, to Surah 114. And this volume is now in the Weber collection at the National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C. The volume, unsigned and undated, starts with Surat al-Fatiha, set in an illuminated double page. And the illuminations here are part of the 16th century refurbishment. So they are Safavid Ottoman in style, whereas the calligraphy is original, so from the 1320s. The so-called throne verse, Ayat al-Kursi, without a heading, occupies the verso of the second folio and the first two lines of the third folio's recto. Oops, sorry. Yes, here. So the Ayat al-Kursi is here. By contrast, Surat al-Naba is introduced by a title, here with the second word of the first verse, Yatasa'alun, which is here, and immediately follows on the same page. The addition of the first Quranic chapter and the throne verse at the beginning of a juz is rather unusual, and careful examination confirms that it is original. A possible explanation may be that this copy was destined for a newly converted Muslim. Al-Fatiha is the surah to know by heart in order to perform the ritual prayers, while the verse of the throne encapsulates the tenets of the Islamic faith and is the most popular verse. Although the volume is neither signed nor dated, it must have been copied by a talented calligrapher who probably worked, if not in the royal workshop, at least for the court. And it is in these courtly circles that one of the earliest known copies of a selection of suras may have been created in the 14th centuries. The volume, known as the Five Suras, is now dispersed. It has been attributed to Baghdad, circa 3070, during the reign of the Jalayrid Sultan Sheikh Uwais, and the writing to Abu Muhammad ibn Karam Shahi Tabrizi, one of the lead calligraphers at the time. The bold muhakkak in black and outlined in gold and the refined illumination undoubtedly parallel works by master calligraphers trained by Ahmad al-Surawardi, Abdullah Sayrafi, and Arkhun al-Kamili, and suggest royal Jalayrid patronage. The size of the page, 45 by 33 centimeters, recalls other manuscripts commissioned by members of the ruling elite. However, it is smaller than the imperial Qurans in 30 volumes produced for the Ilkhanid ruler Al-Jaytu that we've just seen. Yet, the scale, splendid calligraphy, and lavish illuminations suggest this work must have been a royal commission. Its use, however, remains unclear. Was it intended for an intimate private oratory or a shared public space like a congregational mosque? Of particular note is the layout of the text, which follows the organization of a regular and complete mushaf. It is indeed presented contiguously, with chapters following each other in an uninterrupted manner, and marginal medallions indicating verse counts and textual divisions, much like in a full copy of the Quran. As this folio demonstrates, here you have the end of Surat Al-An'am, so Surat 6, followed immediately by Surat Al-Kahf, so the 18th surah. And here, the end of Surat Al-Kahf, and following right after it, the 34th Surah Sabah. The later history of this dispersed selection of surahs is not known. What this manuscript suggests, however, is that the genre of selection of surahs probably originated in 14th century Western Iran and Iraq, a region under the control of the Ilkhanids and their successors. More precisely, development of selections of surahs as independent volumes seems to appear in the second half of the 14th century, when Western Iran, Iraq, and parts of Anatolia were under the control of the Jalayirids. The volumes suggest, and these volumes in particular, suggest that they were first created for elite and courtly circles and ascribed and ascribed to some of the most talented calligraphers. The practice seems to continue into the Timurid period, as exemplified by the selection of suras penned by the Timurid prince Ibrahim Sultan ibn Shahrukh, who governed Shiraz and the Fars region between 1415 and his death in 1435. An accomplished calligrapher, Ibrahim Sultan completed the copy in 827 Hijri, 1423. It comprises 16 folios, measuring each 65 by 45 centimeters. The Quranic text is written in gold muhakkak, outlined in black or black sulus, and adorned with fine illuminations characteristic of the Shirazi arts of the book of the period. The volume differs from the previous examples as it contained 12 different suras, including Yasin, al-Fath, and Nabah. And here, Surat al-An'am and Surat al-Mulk are conspicuously absent. This is going to change dramatically in the second half of the 15th century, with a surge in the production of volume consisting of a selection of Quranic chapters in the Ottoman realm. The tradition of combining chapters from the Quran into independent single volumes gained momentum under Bayezid II, who ruled between 1481 and 1512. At this time, the production of selections of suras, which could include as many as 10 chapters, became widespread. The genre's popularity is particularly evident in the work of Sheikh Hamdullah, who signs dozens of volumes of single surahs or of selected Quranic chapters. Many other copies are attributed to him on stylistic ground, and his students were equally active in producing such volumes. Hamdullah ibn Mustafa Dede, better known as Sheikh Hamdullah, is acknowledged as the founder of the Ottoman school of calligraphy under the reign of Bayezid II. He began his career in Amasya as instructor to the then Prince Bayezid and followed him to Istanbul, where the latter was enthroned in 1481. For the rest of his life, Sheikh Hamdullah was active in the Ottoman capital until his death in 1520. Extremely prolific, he developed a new canon for the 6 Quranic cursive scripts known as al-Aqlam as-Sitta, which include Sulus, Nasr, Rika'a, Tawqir, Rayhan, and Muhakkak. As recounted by later sources, the Sheikh modified and redefined the form of the Nasr and Sulus styles by following the model developed by Yaqut al-Musta'simi, who was being considered as the Qibla al-Qutab. In general, the layout of the volumes with Surat al-An'am follows the canon established by Sheikh Hamdullah. A typical example is what you see on the screen, a manuscript kept in the Topkapı Palace in Istanbul. Its pocket-sized dimensions suggest that it was used for private devotion. The text block is formatted as a double square, and the calligraphy is in minute nasr. And here, basically, so it's quite oblong. The colophon, which is here, stands apart from the surah text and appears on the page following the chapter's end. Marginal devices or inscription that marks the divisions within the Quranic text are conspicuously absent. A novelty is the addition of prayers within the manuscript. It can be the prayer that was to follow the recitation of the surah, like you see here. Here, so that's the end of the surah. And here you have the dua you recite once you have completed the recitation of the surah. Another dua starts being included in some volumes of Surat al-An'am in the second quarter of the 16th century. And it is an abridged version of the supplication of the prophets, so dua Rasulullah. It appears here in the margin, so it's here, of adjacent to verse 124, in which the disbelievers say, "We will not believe until we receive one like those received by Allah's messengers." Here, the two consecutive names of God on the second and third lines are written in gold. The location also marks the place where the Quranic recitation must stop, waqf lazim, to avoid alteration of the meaning. The dua is penned in smaller nasr than the surah's text and is inscribed diagonally in an illuminated cartouche. At the end of the volume, so the prayer for completing the recitation of Surah Al-An'am immediately follows the surah and is also copied in a smaller nasr. The size of the script indicates that this is a non-Quranic textual addition, and as such, it should not be considered equal to the sacred text. Reciting a surah brought protections and barakah, and those recurrent in the selection of surahs, such as Surah Yasin, Al-Fath, Al-Mulk, were and still are particularly popular. Surah Al-An'am, however, stands apart, especially in the Ottoman context. The sixth Quranic chapter may have held a particular importance for Bayezid II, who used single volumes of Al-An'am for daily use, as suggested in the memoir of his Genoese page, Menavino, composed in the early 16th century. Each morning, 40 reciters would come to the mosque in the third court of the Topkapi Palace in order to recite Surat Al-An'am at the request of Bayezid II. The recitation would lead to, and I quote, "the Sultan's success and well-being, and his wishes would be fulfilled." And the text actually starts, 40 priests called Enamjolar come every day as soon as the doors to the palace open. They are not slaves of the Grand Turk, but receive a stipend of 4 asper per day. Each of them enters in the mosque with a book in his hands. They form a circle and they start to read a chapter of the Quran called An'am, which lasts 1 hour. Menavino's account is doubly important, for not only it names Al-An'am as the specific surah that is recited, but it also mentions that each one of the 40 reciters holds a book during the performance of the recitation. And it happens that these 40 volumes still exist. There are single tones of Al-An'am, which were endowed to the Hagia Sophia Library by Mahmud I in the 1730s. They all have the same dimensions and the same brown leather binding. They also follow the same format with 7 lines in Nasr in the style of Sheikh Hamdullah and the title written in gold. There is no signature, but each of the 40 volumes bears the oval seal of Bayezid II, that you see here, but if I go back, yes. So that's the seal of Bayezid II. Even if the volumes look identical, they are in fact all different, ranging in page number from 28 to 32. And the variations in length means that the experience of reciting Surat Al-An'am would be different from one day to another, because the reciter would recite a different volume of Al-An'am each day. And here you can see that if it's the same from the last line onward, the text have been displayed differently. So every book of the same surah is different. The reason why Surat al-An'am was the chapter of preference for the Ottoman Sultan might be explained by the surah's content. Al-An'am was revealed in the late Meccan period, in a time when the Muslim community struggled for survival. By reaffirming the Islamic principles, the chapter encouraged the Prophet and his companions to oppose the disbelievers and to warn them about the wrongdoing of their actions. The parallel with the Ottoman Sultan and his subjects contending with European Christian powers, but even more with the Shia Safavids of Iran, may explain the popularity of the surah in the late 15th and through the 16th century. One should also consider the rise of popularity of Surat al-An'am recitation through the Sufi prism, with the Khalwati order gaining favor with Bayezid II, notably, and the question of authority, both spiritual and temporal. Surat al-An'am evokes all the biblical prophets and their missions. It narrates the story of Abraham and his descendants, and it draws a comparison between the book of Moses and the one sent down to Muhammad. The surah extols God as all-powerful and the ultimate guide, and it concludes as follows: "It is He who has appointed you viceroys in the earth, and has raised some of you in rank above others, that He may try you in what He has given you. Surely thy Lord is swift in retribution, and surely He is all-forgiving, all-compassionate." The term Khalifa, Khala'if, which is actually, oops, no. I thought I had, yeah, which is on this page, basically. So I'm sorry, I was on the wrong page. So that's the end of the surah with the term Khala'if here. The term, which translates as successor, ruler, or viceroy, may have had a particular resonance for members of a dynasty that has long sought to justify its legitimacy of its rule. By progressively incorporating Sufi notions of authority into a legalistic framework from the time of Bayezid II's rule onward, the Ottoman sultans were seen not only as the temporal successor to the Prophet, Khalifa Rasulullah, and part of the spiritual lineage of the biblical prophets, but also as God's vice-regent, Khalifa Allah, a title not used since the fall of the Abbasids, implying that the Ottomans were divinely ordained to govern. With Suleiman I eventually assuming the title of Caliph, the Ottomans also wanted to give more prominence to their historical attachments to the Abbasid Caliphate. In their eyes, Surat al-An'am became a means to link the two dynasties. It is during the reign of Suleiman I that the 6th Quranic chapter is officially listed as one of the main surahs to be recited in imperial mosques for the protection of the ruling monarch and his empire. The Waqfiyah of Sultan Suleiman's I mosque complex, the Suleymaniye in Istanbul, built between 1548 and 1559, sheds light on this development, as again here, 40 reciters who daily delivered Surat al-An'am for the strengthening of the Sultan's sovereignty. And that is clearly stipulated in the Waqfiyah. Although the time of day for the recitation is unspecified, the recitation may have taken place every morning following the schedule at the Topkapi Palace during Bayezid II's reign. It would also be critical, if not essential, for the Quranic text to be physically present during the recitation. Sorry, I'm just gonna... At that time, the famed calligrapher Ahmad Karaisari produced single copies of Surat al-An'am. One of his earliest such works was completed in 1538-39. The surah is copied in Nasr, and 9 lines of text per page. It is followed by the phrase marking the completion of the recitation. Sadaqa Allah lazim. Oops, sorry. Here, written in 3 lines in bold sulus, while the recitation's completion prayer, which is on the next page, here, is in Rayhan script and inscribed so on the verso of the last folio. If this arrangement follows the design established by earlier Ottoman calligraphers, as we've seen with Sheikh Hamdullah, the opening folios with the beginning of the surah presents a novel and original layout. On each page, 2 central rondels include the Quranic text in 9 lines and copied in minute nasr. 2 large horizontal bands frame the rondels above and below. The upper right cartouche presents the surah's title in gold, whereas the text in the 3 other bands, copied in black ink, continues with the surah, which appears in the circles. Other Surat al-An'am's volumes by Ahmad Karaisari display this unprecedented layout. Verse 124, which requires a pause in the Quranic recitations and where the prayer of the prophets can be recited, is located here on the left rondel. The phrase "prophets of God," Rusulallah, here, is written in gold and stands out in the middle, in the center of the circle. So a new visuality for Surat al-An'am is also emphasized here by marginal decoration. Stylized vegetable friezes created with stencils run on the 3 external sides of each page. They further differentiate these single copies of the Surat al-An'am not only from Quranic sets and Masahif in particular, in the sense that such ornamentation is conspicuously absent, but also from not only from Masahif, but also from Ottoman volumes of al-An'am. So in a certain sense, these volumes by Ahmad Karaisari mirror the architectural decoration in contemporaneous Ottoman imperial mosques. It may not be accidental that such evolutions in Karaisari's works appeared at a time when chief architect Sinan was developing his own style of architecture, with notably the complex of Shehzadeh Mehmet, completed in 1548. The juxtaposition of Muhakkak and Sulus in the larger bands of his Surat al-An'am also appears in the Quranic inscriptions of the Shehzadeh mosque that you have basically in the dome here. An indication that they may have been designed by Karaisari himself. The formal parallels between the dome of the place of worship and the inscribed circles of the manuscript, as well as between the restrained ornamentation in the sanctuary and those in the margin of the Suleymaniye copy, may further strengthen this attribution to the calligrapher. One may even postulate that his copies of Surat al-An'am were intended for the Friday mosques built at the time. Displaying volume with Surat al-An'am became integral to the daily religious rituals in mosques, much like a whole mushaf or a juz section when they were used by the reciter and were visible to the worshippers. In the mid-16th century, The text also became part of the architectural environment as the Ottomans augmented the performative aspect of reciting from a copy of a surah or of a collection of surahs. Ahmad Karaisari's majestic Surat al-An'am, and that's the one you see on the screen, confirms this idea. And you have to think that it's monumental in size. With its combination of 4 different scripts on a page, Sulus, Muhakkak, Nasr, and Rayhan here, and the contrast between the black and gold scripts, the calligrapher's mastery transcribed visually the power of the surah's message, which was recited in the sanctuary of the legitimate and uncontested Sultan Caliph. The end of the chapter in Karaisari's Surat al-An'am here is entirely written in gold, and is followed on the verso of the page by the completion prayer penned in bold muhakkak here. And here is the colophon with the signature of Ahmad Karaisari. The proportions of the manuscript equal the imperial volumes of the Il-Ghanid ul-Jaytu that we see at the beginning of my talk, which Suleiman I brought back from his Persian campaign in 1533, and which may have served, if not as a model, at least as an inspiration to Ahmad Karaisari. Contrarily to earlier and contemporaneous copies of the Quran and volumes of Surat al-An'am, with marginal devices and division and subdivisions, prostration markers, and signs for recitations, Karaisari's copies are devoid of any such elements. The 6 Quranic chapters appears as a standalone. This aesthetic and artistic choice illustrates the merging of political discourse with the spiritual and religious developments of Suleiman's first reign. The conquest of Syria and Egypt by Selim I in 1516-17 brought the Hejaz under Ottoman sovereignty, making the Ottoman Sultan the de facto custodian of the 2 holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and also of Jerusalem. The seizure of Baghdad, the former capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, by Suleiman in 1535, then in the hands of the Safavids, enhanced the prestige of the House of Osman, even though the symbolic power of the Caliphate was transferred to Cairo by the Mamluks after the sack of the city by the Mongols in 1258. Uniting these cities under Ottoman authority eventually meant that the Sultan was seen as the legitimate successor to the Prophet on the one hand, and as the heir of the Abbasid Caliph on the other, the universal ruler with God-given power. One can perhaps argue that the aforementioned attributes of caliphal authority are visually emphasized and justified in Karaisari's majestic Surat al-An'am. The grand mise-en-page in the volume highlights the surah and amplifies its message in a similar manner to the inscriptions in the Suleymaniye Mosque, where it was probably meant to be used. At this point, it would be interesting to go back to the beginning of the 16th century and to a manuscript in the collections of the Library of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. It consists of Surat al-Fath, preceded by al-Fatiha. The particularity of the work resides not only in its dimension, it's a pretty large volume, 45 by 30, but also in the fact that it is entirely written in a form of script based on the ancient angular Kufic, yet with dots and diacritics to allow the proper reading. The letters are further adorned with a stupendous repertoire of motifs, which include elaborate flowers and leaves, stylized whirling clouds, and geometric forms with complex knots. Written in layers of thick black ink, letters and motifs all received a yellow-orange varnish, giving the impression of a lacquered work, which shimmers in the light. It is unclear when the varnish layer was applied. An unusually long colophon, written in Nasr on an orange ground, gives the name of the Mamluk Sultan Qansu el-Khuri, written in that cartouche, who reigned between 1501 and 1516, and the whole colophon, except the cartouche, is varnished also. The work is signed by calligrapher Hamza al-Sharifi, whose career is otherwise unknown. It provides the date of 909, 1503, 1504, and the place of production as Istanbul, referenced as Dar el-Khilafa Constantiniye, so the abode of the Caliphate, Constantinople, a puzzling anachronism if one considers that the proclamation of the Ottoman Sultan as Caliph came later in the 16th century. So what was the purpose of this volume? There is nothing more symbolic than the selection of a chapter of the Quran and the meaning it conveys. Surat al-Fath offers encouragement to the Prophet and his followers after conflict with Mecca. It announces that the prophetic message was entrusted with Muhammad, who will be eventually victorious in his mission and against the unbelievers. By placing the manuscript into the context of the year of its creation, 909 Hijri, 1503, 1504, the symbolic message conveyed by the manuscript appears obvious, wishing victory over a common threat that both the Mamluk and Ottoman sultanates were facing, Shah Ismail I and the Safavids. Their occasional penetrations into Mamluk and Ottoman territories caused grave concerns in both Cairo and Istanbul, and with his strong Shia rhetoric, Shah Ismail also posed an ideological threat to the Sunni, Ottoman, and Mamluk regimes. How this particular copy was used and displayed remains to be investigated. But another volume of Surat al-Fath, created a few decades later in Iran, raises similar questions. It was copied by the famous calligrapher Dost Muhammad in the 1540s in Iran. The 39 verses of the surah stand out as Dost Muhammad used Nastaliq, a codified non-Quranic script that developed in 14th century Iran mainly for copying works in Persian, especially poetry. By the 16th century, Nastaliq had become synonymous with Iran as the visual embodiment of the Persian language. The Safavid version of Surat al-Fath then may not have been fortuitous or innocent. Dost Muhammad certainly intended for the chapter of victory he penned to convey a symbolic message. The use of Nastaliq associated Islam with Iran and could be understood as a visual means to legitimize Safavid religious ambition and the dynasty's efforts to assert its authority to lead the global Muslim community. What is interesting that for comparison, there is this Mus'haf copied slightly, the same year, 1538, by another great calligrapher, Shah Mahmud Nishapuri, and the whole Mus'haf is entirely copied, penned in Nastaliq. Incidentally, this copy is now in the Topkapi and was offered by the Safavid ruler to the Ottoman Sultan Murad III for his accession to the throne. Meaning, and I think you understand it, the Quran is in Nastaliq. Nastaliq equals with Iran. So it's clearly how to use visuality here to basically make propaganda. So mounted into refined and elaborated designed margins, Dost Muhammad Surat al-Fath was possibly made for Shah Tahmasp or a high member of the Safavid court. In some ways, it competes with the contemporaneous enams by Ahmad Karaisari. One may even wonder, in fact, if the work by Dost Muhammad was not meant also to be a gift or to be sent to the Ottomans, because it's now in Istanbul as well. In any case, both copies of the Suras prominently illustrate the fierce competition in religious self-fashioning by Muslim rulers during the formation of the early modern Islamic empires, as well as the affirmation of sectarian and state identities. Their unique visual power demonstrates how the Quran, pietistic practices, political thought, and art coalesce in the mid-16th century across West Asia and beyond dynastic borders, a process which was initiated 200 years before in the Mongol period when Ibn Battuta was then traveling the world. Thank you.